Welcome to the Happy Homeschooler Podcast, a digital support group for everyone interested in a learning lifestyle. I'm your host, Melody.
I'm your co-host, Holly.
Well, hello, Holly. Today we'll be talking about how to teach math, but before we get into our topic, what have you been up to since the last time we talked?
Oh my goodness, it's been a whirlwind. As our listeners might remember, my husband, he had some surgery on his foot, and he's been going through recovery on that. And today he got really good news that he's released from wound care. He's not completely healed up, but he's allowed to do some light duty things, and he has less restrictions. So that was good news. But the best thing that happened was last week. My daughter and son-in-law and two of their dogs were coming for a visit, and I had been busily preparing for their arrival. And they got to my house and called me to come outside, and were asking me something about where they could let the dogs, relieve themselves. And just as I'm pointing to an area, around the corner comes my youngest daughter, and they had surprised me. And so I didn't know she was coming. And so we just wrapped up a whole week with them being here, and we took a visit down to Galveston, and we just had the most fun. 5 of my 6 kids and my husband and me and my son-in-law, we just had a whirlwind of a week. So now I have to go into recovery mode and find a new routine, because we were all off our routine. What about you? What's been going on with you? We missed you the last episode.
Oh, I am so glad to be back. But what a great surprise that all your kids were there. I did miss out. When you and I joke about being Twinkies sometimes. My husband had a health scare and ended up spending some time in the hospital, and is much, much better now. So that hospital stay threw us off completely, and we're just now, it was very exhausting to be there, and then to coming home, we just needed to recover from being away. And so he's gradually, every day got better and better and better. And so that just threw off our whole month. I'm getting back into the swing of things. Everything, when something like that happens, when you have a little emergency, everything, you drop everything, you take care of that, and then you got to pick it all back up, but all the pieces aren't where you dropped them. And so get everything back together. And then we got some exciting news. A move is in our future, into my children are pulling together and helping to prepare a little house for us, and so that was very exciting. And
it's really fun because your daughter is posting the progress pictures.
It's amazing.
on her Instagram or Facebook. So I'm so excited to be having a little bird's eye view.
Oh, it's so much fun. It's a huge project. We've been bouncing these ideas around for a while, but when things actually start happening, it gets really exciting once you get over being overwhelmed. So a lot has been happening, and I feel like, the first 2 weeks or is it 3 weeks of summer just went zipped by. I mean, we're not officially summer yet, but
exactly.
but the first 2 weeks of June have just zipped by, and I feel like I'm a little bit behind on I always have way too many projects I think I'm going to get done before we start back into the routine of school again. And some of those things, I'm just going to let those things drop off. That Lazy Genius book I was reading, it's like, I'll just decide some of those things weren't that important and they can drop off my list. We're planning to start another periodical series about deep dives into different subjects, and we're going to be talking about some of those basic core subjects that we're all teaching when we're teaching our children. So these are things that newcomers to homeschooling are needing to know. And then those of us been teaching a while, every year in math, or in the subjects, the needs change. And so whether you've got younger children and you're just starting out, or you've been doing it a while and you've come to a new topic that you might not be feeling as confident in, we want to explore ways to make that job easier. And today we want to talk about math.
Yes, because math provokes a lot of strong emotions, and since we are all going to have to teach it, we might as well get that out of the way first.
Right. We've got people who are math phobic, and then people who love math and tinker with numbers just for fun. So I think that no matter where you are on that um, scale, where you like how you feel about math, you can help your kids be successful. And then, if you don't love it, at least math can be your friend and you can know what to do with it.
True. I know that for me, I liked math a lot until I was in 4 different schools in 1 year.
Oh, man.
And yeah, when I was in 8th grade, my mom got remarried, and I was in a school in one town, and we moved to another town. So then I was in a second school, and then after the summer, I had gone on to 9th grade. And when I was in 9th grade, I went to a different school in that new town, and then we moved again back up to northeastern Ohio, but just outside of where we had originally lived. So I was in a 4th school. Well, by the time I got to the 4th school, they had put me in the wrong algebra class, and I was in algebra 2 for a month when I was supposed to be in algebra 1. And that was the beginning of my frustration with abstract math concepts. So I brought that with me when I had to start teaching math to my children. I'm glad to say I'm a lot better after teaching 5 people some high school math. But it was very difficult for me. So I'm not a lover of math, and I don't play with numbers for fun. But I suspect you, though we're Twinkies, are on a different side of that coin.
It's true. I went to the same school system from 1st grade to 12th grade. And so I didn't realize, until much later what a gift that was, because there was that the whole program built over the years. And I feel like I had some really good math teachers who, it wasn't just their job, they really liked math and they knew how to make it interesting, and they were good teachers, because just because you know how to do something doesn't mean you can teach it to someone else. I've had some teachers in college that they knew their subject, but they couldn't impart that knowledge to you or look at it from a different angle to help you understand. And so I enjoyed math, and we can definitely the difference. But how old were you when you had to switch, when you moved? How old were you?
Let's see. I was always one of the youngest students in my class. I graduated just before I turned 18, so that was my sophomore year. I must have been 15, 16. I'm not for sure. I was in 9th grade, and so it was really frustrating because I was struggling, and a lot of the people around me couldn't help me. My stepfather was a draftsman, but he couldn't help me with algebra. My mom hadn't finished high school. She couldn't help me. The teacher wasn't very helpful, the 9th grade teacher. Thank goodness the 10th grade teacher held me by the hand and got me through algebra 2 and made me feel a little bit better. But yeah, sometimes when people understand something, they're not very good at teaching it. Or maybe they understand math in a certain sphere of math, but they're not good with another kind of math. So I think it's really important that we explore all that so that everybody can be aware of what some of the pitfalls might be, or where you might have a blinder because you're really good at a certain thing, but maybe it's harder for you to explain it. And math seems to be one of those topics where those things happen more.
Oh, I agree. And then too, you may have children, just, some of my children, math came easily to them, and some of them struggle with it a little bit. Some of them could do it as long as we were, we just, like you do with anything, take small steps, and everything kind of built on what happened before.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes trying to figure out it's like you're trying to get into the mind of the child who they don't know how to tell you what is hard with this topic, and you're trying to figure out how to help them grasp it. And if it comes easily to you, you're just having to really back up and think. Thankfully, we had curriculum that we really liked, and for the one of my daughters, very kinesthetic learner. So I chose something that was very hands-on, and through working with those manipulatives, she progressed really well up until somewhere in, pre-algebra or something. I think she began to falter a little bit, but we found a friend who could help her make sense of it. I think mostly because they came at it from they taught it in a different way, or they had a different understanding and just could communicate it better. And what's interesting is that now, this is my daughter who does all the interior decorating and measuring and works with math all the time. There's so much part of what she does, but it's just, once all that background, it's like, okay, good. You know the math you need for what you love. And,
right. Yeah. And the other thing too is that I remember when I started homeschooling, my oldest child was going into second grade. I wasn't apprehensive at all about teaching her math, because that was the basic kind of stuff that everybody does all day long, adding, some subtraction, measuring things, stuff that's pretty basic. But I did start to get anxiety when my kids were approaching the higher math, because I knew I had struggled with algebra. And I had started to take geometry in high school, but I really couldn't understand anything that teacher was telling me. It was like a foreign language, and I didn't need the credit, so I dropped it. One thing I did realize is from the time I had graduated high school till the time I started teaching my kids algebra and geometry, my brain had matured. And because I had the teacher's manual and I could see how things worked out, I began to understand it a lot better. So I think that, where you start might affect your comfort level. If you're starting off with a kindergarten student, it's really easy going and you're going to progress incrementally with your kid. The curriculum. If you're starting, you just took your kid out of high school, or maybe they finished 8th grade and they're starting in 9th grade, and it's been, quite a while since you did a quadratic equation. You might have a little more anxiety about teaching math than you would if you're starting with a kindergartner.
Absolutely. It's a completely different set of circumstances facing you. So it would, I always told the new people starting out with the young children, it's like you can learn along with them and you can review and you'll, strengthen all the math knowledge you already have. But it is a challenge if you're starting with like junior high maybe, or middle school. I guess we're calling it middle school now. That's a lot of review. So that's not even as scary as if you're jumping off into geometry or algebra or something like that. And even though we joke around my house, like, okay, I've done algebra now, I guess 9 times, because I took it myself and then I taught each one of them and then I taught other people. It's like there's still things in there. If it's not something that I'm using all the time, I have to stop and think. It's like, okay, I know this. I have to review. Like you said, you've got the manual.
Yeah, that review thing happens every time I have to teach someone to convert from temperatures from Celsius to Fahrenheit.
Right. It's like, I know that.
Yeah.
And we write it down or we look it up. But that's the other thing. It's like you have tools that you can use. And I know that's part of what we want to share today is what you can do to make it less daunting if it's feeling like a challenge to you. But it definitely matters how old your child is and how you feel about it and how they feel about it.
Right, because you might have a kid that really loves math and you might not love it so much. You don't want to squash their enthusiasm, or you might love it and you might be trying to teach someone who would really prefer never to have to look at numbers. So yeah, it's very rare that you and the student are matched evenly about how you're doing it. And also, like if I wasn't really math proficient and I had a kid who wasn't really math proficient, well, I wanted them to become math proficient. I didn't want them to repeat my cycle, so there was that challenge too. My youngest daughter wasn't super thrilled about math, so much to the point that when she was in high school, she only had pre-algebra and algebra 1, and I'd have to go back and look at her transcript because she's older now. She may have had some geometry. I really can't remember, but I know that she bucked me on math, and I got tired of butting heads with her, so I graduated her with whatever the bare minimum was, and I said, well, this is on you now, and you're going to have to figure out how to pass that test for community college math. So she got a friend to tutor her, and she did pass it and got into the be able to take math without doing remedial math. So sometimes you have a kid that just really doesn't like it, and you're dragging them along like a lead weight. But eventually, they'll find their motivation. However, we don't want to start off with that idea that that's how it's going to be.
Right. And then you have people who are coming to homeschooling from a situation, maybe a public school or private school, or they're just starting, and they realize that their children are perhaps not up to grade level, which we could discuss whether or not that really matters. And sometimes it's like, okay, you've got to figure out what do they know, like figure out where you need to start. And sometimes it may mean backing up to some really basic math concepts. But that's really, like with anything, start with what you know and build on it, and don't worry too much in the beginning about whether or not you're in the quote-unquote right grade level, because you really want to build a good foundation and make sure your kids are comfortable with numbers and understand just those basic things, so that by the time they get to middle school and high school and have to start building on that foundation, those things are more automatic.
Right. Yeah.
Because we use math all the time, and I know we just did a whole lot of real life math, like cutting pizzas or brownies or coffee cake or whatever. When you're dividing up a certain number of things, we do that all the time, but it's a good idea to connect that to math. Like math has meaning and it's useful, and this part of math is just a fun way that we're using math in our everyday life.
Yeah, you might remember I told a story in a previous episode about when my daughter didn't want to do math, my oldest daughter, and I said that was fine.
Oh,
and
yeah.
She wanted me to make Kool-Aid and cut her sandwich in kitty corners, and finally, after I kept telling her I couldn't do any of these things because it all involved math, she just asked for her math paper. But it is good to help kids understand that you really can't divorce yourself from math. I mean, this morning I drove my son to Vacation Bible School. I covered some miles. I had to put gas in the car. It was so many cents per gallon, and it costs so much money. I mean, math is just everywhere. So getting your kids to understand that math isn't something they can opt out of is really a good thing to do.
We're going to take a short break to hear a word from our sponsor. And when we get back, we'll share our strategies for making math an enjoyable experience for everyone.
After a long day of teaching math, it's hard to have the mental bandwidth to write out a high school transcript.
That's where today's sponsor, Transcript Maker, comes in.
Oh my goodness, yes. When I was having my first student in high school and I realized I had to make a transcript, I almost put them back into public school. But then here math. But here is Transcript Maker calculating GPA for me. I was so happy to find Transcript Maker.
Oh, I think it's a wonderful program. I love that you can just plug in your information and let Transcript Maker do all the calculations for you.
Oh, yes. And you know what I think is so exciting, too, is they have a lot of choices. So some people like numeric grades, like they want to give their student a 98. And some people want to give them an A+. And you can choose to do either of those with Transcript Maker. Just click on the little drop-down arrow and choose your grading scale. And the same thing with all kinds of other features, like what style of a transcript you want to print. You want to print it in portrait or landscape? You have choices.
Oh, I love that. So how can our listeners take advantage of that?
Go to www.transcriptmaker.com and sign up for the 14-day free trial and give it a test drive.
Plus, listeners of our podcast can save 20% off their subscription with our coupon code, HAPPY, in all caps, HAPPY.
Give your brain a rest with Transcript Maker.
Simply better transcripts. Welcome back to the podcast. In the first half, we discussed the challenges of teaching math, whether or not it's one of your favorite subjects. But no matter how you feel about math, you can teach your children.
Well, I can tell you that's true because, like I said earlier, I didn't feel great about math, but I have successfully graduated 4 kids, and they did take math. So, you don't have to love it to be able to teach it. There's lots of ways to get to that point.
Right, and I graduated all my kids too, and they all know enough math to get by in the real world, and everybody is fine with math. And so some of them really were not fans of math, and had some who were happy as larks to just work their way through the math curriculum, and then others who just did not like they didn't like that plodding along. They wanted something a little more interesting. And so for one child in particular, we started doing more hands-on things, and I found some curriculum that incorporated like real life math situations, like blueprint for geometry was one thing where you were looking at floor plans and elevations, and you were calculating the square footage of a room and things like that that seemed to be more interesting. Just a way to spark interest in that child again. You know how you do where you read books about something they're really interested in or something like that. And so coming at it from that approach sort of helped us get the ball rolling again.
You know, that's so interesting to me because I was much better at using those kind of additional resources for my elementary and perhaps like my middle school kids than in high school. So in
I
elementary,
think we forget.
in elementary and middle school, I mean, goodness, math is so easy to teach because say you have to teach your kids to add. I used to get M&Ms for my kids. Let's add, we used them for sorting. Let's put all the blue ones here and all the red ones here. Okay, let's count how many blue ones and how many reds. How many, who has more, the red or the blue? What if we add 2 reds and 2 blues? Like all of that, you can just take your math paper for elementary school and you can substitute hands-on activities and just put a check mark. They do, of course, have to learn how to put the pencil to the paper and do the work. But when they're young like that, you can substitute games and activities to cover your math curriculum quite easily. And I have sitting next to me on my desk here a whole stack of math games. And I also have some in a drawer that I didn't pull out because I'm not even sure if they're still being made because I used them so long ago. But I didn't know. And I've been homeschooling a long time until you said blueprint for geometry. I was like, that's a new one on me.
How about that? That's by, I believe, Key Curriculum Press, Blueprint for Geometry.
I love Key Curriculum Press. They make math so easy for junior high and high school students, especially for the non-math oriented students.
Yes, because they break it down into small steps and it's a workbook format. You can write. That was one of the things with one of my children needed to write in the workbook, so they didn't like a textbook writing on their own paper, which seems kind of like to the rest of the kids that wasn't a problem, but it was a tactile thing, and it was just like, okay, then let's find a way to make it work, which I think as parents is what we do, find a way to make it work or find a way to do the best you can with what you have until you can find something else. But we did love that one, and then like you mentioned, it's easy when they're in elementary school to do the hands-on and the real world and the show and tell and patterns, because like Legos, we'd used Legos for a lot of noticing patterns, and even things like they needed a 2x3 square. It has 6 bumps on it, so you can even pull in your multiplication and all of those kinds of things. But then when they get older, we tend to forget, and we just like focus on the paper and the pencil, and we don't utilize things that are out there to make it more practical, I guess.
Well, in real world math isn't a lot of pencil and paper so much. If you're going to buy carpeting, you're going to get the ruler, the measuring tape out, and you're going to measure the walls. You are going to write it down. You're going to figure out the square footage of the room. You're going to figure out your dimensions. But a lot of it involves getting tools. If I'm going to make a dinner, and I know a recipe's supposed to serve 6 and there are 12 people, I know I'm going to double everything. Instead of 1 cup of flour for the whatever, I'm going to have 2 cups. A lot of that kind of stuff is still hands-on, but we don't think about that when we're looking at a math curriculum and we're trying to teach math in high school. So it's really important for our listeners to realize the stuff that we all know is that you can do hands-on things in high school. It does just take a little more thinking outside of the textbook. But the great thing is a lot of the curriculum have guides online that tell you these things too. Like my Math UC curriculum, it has a lot of practical stuff online that tells you how to, extend the learning for the student.
And I found the same to be true with Key Curriculum Press. I remember reading through, we used their Mequon series with the younger ones, and the it's not really a teacher guide, but it's got, I'm trying to think of the name of that, but it's background for what's going on in those pages and how to do it, and I found it was just fascinating. So I would read that for fun. Because there was so much extra things that you could do. And even if we didn't do those things, just the thought process of how to extend this learning was really helpful. But we also found ways to use math in games and just conversation with the little ones, even with the older ones too, because those like money skills can kind of fall under math, and how to calculate, sales tax and understanding what it is and how to calculate it, or is this really a good sale, or is this a good price per ounce, or things like that. We did a lot with math in that way, so that for the children who weren't going to go on into higher math, I knew they had all of the basic math skills they needed to adult well.
I ran into something recently that was kind of funny. My youngest son is really into Minecraft, and he is encountering Roman numerals, but he doesn't know what they are yet. So he said to me the other day, I have this potion, 1 IV, and I said, oh, that's actually Roman numeral 4. So I think I'm actually going to teach him some Roman numerals this summer, just in the context of helping him to understand what that VIII is, or the IV, or whatever the things are. But
I always thought it was fun. Yeah, and it's on clocks. You see that on clocks quite often. And what was it? What was that movie? Raiders of the Lost Ark or something, where the X marks the spot, but it was a 10, the Roman numeral 10, and things like that. Because sometimes when you're that age, it seems like a code, and kids love codes.
They do.
And so we always had fun with Roman numerals. But that kind of reminds me that mention math does have a vocabulary. So it is kind of like we think we're speaking in code, because we're talking about, numerators and denominators and exponents, and these aren't things we typically talk about every day, but you're introducing your kids to a lot of new vocabulary, and I think sometimes we forget to stop and make sure they know what we're even talking about, or how we're going to translate this word problem into numbers, or vice versa. We need to make sure we're all speaking the same language.
Right, and the code words that say more than, or less than, or how many more is that? The other thing I was going to say, going back to the Roman numeral thing, is that, it's okay if something comes up and it's not actually in the sequence of the math curriculum you're using, but it's something practical that your kids might need to teach them that outside of the curriculum. So I don't, off the top of my head, remember when Roman numerals come up, if it's 3rd grade or 4th grade. My son just finished 2nd grade. He's a rising 3rd grader, but because it's got a practical application and it's something tied in with Minecraft, an obsession he has, I'm going to give him some of that, because right now it's the time I think that he will appreciate it and want to use it, instead of when I say, here's this thing on a piece of paper and you have to learn it. I know I'm going to get the deer in the headlights look, but right now I think he'll really appreciate it.
And probably remember it, because it's interesting to him now. I mean, that's part of the whole thing of playing games and making something interesting. If they're already interested in something, that's the time to hitch your wagon to that engine and, run with it. So that was a lot of mixed metaphors. But
we'll talk about that when we do the Teaching English series.
Right. But if the motivation is there, that's the time to jump in, because it's something interesting and fun to learn. And the more ways we can introduce math as something interesting and relevant, and not just drudgery, because for some of them, like, they just had to get through their math papers, and you don't want to just keep pushing through unless they know what they're doing.
Well, speaking of drudgery, that kind of takes us to memorization, which a lot of kids hate to do. I remember when I was a kid, we had to do flashcards. We had time drills. You'd have to do 100 problems in like a minute, and people hate that. And there's some elements of rote memorization that are beneficial if you can instantly recall your math facts. But then you have to be careful, right? Because sometimes they've memorized it, but they have no idea what it means.
Right. And I think with so many things, we have to find the balance. And it's not either or, really. We're doing both together. Both and, thank you, because you do want to build understanding, but you don't want children to just plug numbers into some formula that they see and think that that's how you work the problem. You want them to know why that's the right answer. And that was one of my favorite questions when they would give me an answer would be to ask them, how do you know that? Not to be mean, but just like, to understand their thinking. How do you know that? And to hear how they came up with that answer. Because sometimes they're thinking like in a slightly different way. They're coming in the back door maybe of the problem. But just to know why, or sometimes they get the right answer, but they're doing some strange kind of things with the numbers.
That's not going to work over the long haul. Yeah.
Right. It just happens to work for that problem, maybe because of the numbers that they're using. And you want to know that, because if they keep on doing something in the wrong way, then they're going to be so confused later on when that didn't work. Like place value, for one thing. Like if I gave them a pile of 35 linking cubes and I wanted to know how many tens can you get out of that, do they know that the 3 is 3 tens? Or do they have to count all of them? And so it was always one of those math discussions, like how do we know that? Or how could you explain that to someone, just to check for understanding? But I know we were talking about memorization. We did memorize math problems, but we also played games so that they were using the math problems in a game as a way to practice the facts instead of just, flipping the flashcards. There are ways to make it a little more palatable.
Right. And it's important for kids to understand why the things they're doing work the way they do, because they're going to have to show their work Liam, my son, is in that phase where he's now having to start to show some of his work. And he didn't want to do it. And he said, well, I know the answer. And I said, well, you show me how you get the answer. And then he found that he had made some mistakes. So, that I like how you said, how do you know that? Because understanding what the kid knows will help you to be a more effective teacher and facilitator for them.
It's true. And then the other thing about showing your work or writing down the steps, once you get into algebra, you need to write down those steps because there's so many moving parts. If you're trying to do things in your head and you're trying to move ahead too quickly, you lose information and then you make a lot of mistakes. And I just finished up a year working with 12 and 13-year-olds doing, like pre-algebra, and they resisted having to, mostly is they didn't want to use more paper.
Oh, goodness.
Like, on the next line, write the next part. They just wanted to skip ahead and looking for shortcuts, which I understand. Everybody wants to finish their math homework faster. But having to say you want to, show your work, keep track of all those numbers so that you save yourself time in the end by not trying to skip ahead.
Well, talking about people who are trying to cut corners and do their math faster, when we moved, all the public schools moved to virtual schooling, there was a big joke online, right? Like all these kids, their teachers now are telling them to carry the one. And the joke about that is
parents.
Right, yeah, because they're parents, but also it plays into Common Core, which Common Core is a big hot button issue. Some people love it because they feel like it really builds math proficiency for kids and gives them a deep understanding of why what they're doing does what it does. And other people just hate it because they're saying, well, I didn't have to do that, and I can use math. So there are benefits to Common Core because it helps kids to really build a deep understanding of how the numbers work and why the things do what they do. and other countries have a better understanding of math. Their students are more math literate than our students. And some of the homeschool curriculum now has Common Core in it. There's a cool website that it's called, let me take a look here. I think it's called Math On.
Homeschool On.
Homeschool On, that's right. And the owner of that blog has done a really cool comparison chart of different math curricula. It tells whether it has Common Core incorporated in it, what kind of learners that math curriculum is good for, how much time a day it would probably take to do it. And so it's very important, to understand what Common Core is and how it works.
Right. Mostly it's the standards. They've taken the math, all the information. So a good curriculum, like some of the curriculum from the past is still really solid because all of that is built in. Common Core just standardizes it and breaks it all down into all the small steps that the topic is covering. And you can see all the little bitty parts of that math concept all laid out. So some of that's one thing I liked about the chart that you mentioned on that website. A lot of those programs are the same as they were before Common Core, but they've just now are labeling all those things with the Common Core standards.
Yeah, just because we didn't have Common Core doesn't mean it's not good.
Right. Or we had it, we just didn't have it labeled.
It wasn't called that, right?
It wasn't called that.
Yeah.
Right. The basics are still the basics.
There are so many resources that can help us as we educate our kids in math, even if we are not math people ourselves. What are some of your favorite resources that you used or that you recommend to parents when they're homeschooling their kids for the math conundrums that they face?
Right. Well, some of my favorite things were games using things we have. Like we used Cuisinart rods a lot with the little ones, but I also used them some with the older ones. And we would play some games. Like we'd get those are little. In case someone's not familiar with them, Cuisinart rods are a centimeter cube, and then that represents 1, and then 2 is like 2 centimeters long, and 3 centimeters long for 3, and so on. So I'd get 100 square, a grid, like a 10 centimeter grid, and the kids would have the rods, and we'd each get, we'd have dice. Like we'd roll the dice and count the dots to get the right 2 rods that match those numbers, and put them on the square, and then the one who filled up their square first won. But they were doing a lot of adding and subtracting and figuring out could they take these off and trade them and do something else. So it was a lot of practice, but it didn't look like a worksheet. And I also got a lot of games out of Games for Math by Peggy Kay. We played Fast Track a lot because they moved along the board by answering the questions, which were math facts. It was flashcards, really, but it didn't look like flashcards because we were moving our little markers around the game board, and it was fun, and they would want to play it over and over, which was great. They did so much more math that way than they would have if we'd done a worksheet.
Right. Yeah, you just fool them into doing the stuff you want them to do anyway, and they think it's a game. Yeah, we had multiplication bingo, which was a lot of fun. Multiplication is, it's a leap in the way that kids think, that mathematical thinking, and it's often kind of hard for them. So the multiplication bingo was a lot of fun for my kids. And then there's an old game called SMAF, and it says it's a game that makes math fun, and it covers your basics: addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. Just any kind of a game, anything that makes math into a game. Really fun.
Well, I know a lot of people don't have a lot of room for a lot of games, or they don't feel like they want to, fill up their shelves with games. So how about let's mention some websites where people can go and get some ideas.
Yeah, well, one that I think is really useful because it covers elementary all the way through high school is Khan Academy.
I love Khan Academy.
They have full curriculum there, but they also have a way to just have a piece of math explained to you, like, for example, maybe you're having trouble with a certain thing, quadratic equations. You can go and look that up, and it'll show little videos, and it'll take show you step by step what has to be done to do that certain math concept. What about you? What's a website you found that was a good resource?
I like Math Geek Mama, mathgeekmama.com.
Is it a blog?
It's bigger than a blog. She's got all kind of fun resources and tips to help teach math. I think that's one of her, like, help you teach math with confidence or something like that. I get her emails. I think it's grown since I first found her, and I don't even remember how I found her, but she's got all kinds of literature-based math, and there's some freebies and some math card games and hands-on math, and just I found it helpful to help me think outside the box for ways to approach math with the kids, or even fun things to do in the summer. Like, we're still learning, but it doesn't look like it doesn't look like school. It's still math type things. Just a good resource, I think. If you're stuck in your curriculum and you're finding like you need something a little extra, something to help you adjust and make it fit. But she's got a lot of good resources on there. And I know there are dozens more. A simple search will probably pull up all kinds of things. And then, of course, like the balance is don't get lost reading about it when you've got other things to do. But Math Geek Mama has been really helpful for me.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So we've talked about games and we've talked about websites, but, as always, it does come down to your curriculum.
Well, that is certainly true because I've been through several in my homeschooling experience, and when I found MathUC, it fit the bill for me and my family. And it has resources online and hands-on resources that work really well for us. So, yeah, your curriculum is key at the beginning of any endeavor of what you're going to teach is your curriculum.
Right, and you can make it easier on yourself or harder on yourself, like depending on what you choose. Like someone used to say, anything can work if the teacher works. But sometimes as moms, as parents, we would like some of the work to be done for us because we have so much to do. And that's why you want to really look at who you're teaching, what kind of learning style they have, and find math that works for you and your children.
Mm-hmm. And how much time you have to spend on it. How much time.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yes, because we always used to say to remember that curriculum is our servant, not our master. It's here to help us to make our job easier. It's not our boss. So.
Right. So choose wisely.
Choose wisely, for sure.
A few episodes ago, we introduced the Reading Nook. Well, today I'm here at the Big Question Podium. And today's big question is, how do we keep kids busy during travel?
Oh, we just took this trip down to the coast and back, and so I have a little bit of experience with that. You don't want your kids, or at least I don't want my kid, just staring at a tablet. Although, kind of funny, my son was playing Minecraft on a Switch, but he was only allowed to use it for so much of the time. Mm-hmm. So I like to have my children gather some little things in their backpack that they would like to play with. That, they have to give some thought to what are they going to take on their trip that they will enjoy playing with. I like to give them some snacks and maybe in a little lunch box, little snacks that's supposed to last them the whole trip. So if they get all excited the first 30 minutes of the trip and they eat all their snacks, oh well.
Oh well.
Oh well.
As long as they know that going in, right?
Yeah.
Don't spring it on them. We did the same thing too. We'd try to have like some sticker books or something that they could do in the car, and we often had a road bingo.
Oh,
and
sure,
where you're like looking for things. Yeah.
Looking for license plates from different states or whatnot. Mm-hmm. I do
have
one of those in my car. Yeah.
We had a set a long time ago. Like you looked for things like a cow or a stop sign or a street sign or mile markers and barns and, a lot of things that would just keep them busy while they were looking out the window.
Mm-hmm. And that's the thing. It's not my goal to take a road trip and have my kid not see anything.
Well,
A few years ago, we took a trip to from where we live in Central Texas. to Arizona, up to the Grand Canyon, across the Rocky Mountains, and down to Denver. And so I did not want my son to miss out on seeing those things. One of the things we found fun on that trip is there, the little signs that warn you of animals that might be showing up on the road, like watch out for,
right.
Watch
the
out
deer.
for the deer. Well, we started getting real amused because we were encountering road signs like watch out for mountain lions or watch out for bears, or it was really amusing. And then my daughter said they had seen a sign, because she lives in Colorado, that warns you to watch out for mountain goats falling or something. So, a little research about where you're going can also help you to prepare your children for things to watch for when you're driving. When my kids, my first 5 kids were young, we listened to audiobooks, and we listened to lots of kids' musical things. In fact, we were talking about that, and we broke out in song about some songs my kids had listened to, one of my other daughters and I, when we were driving. So, there are a lot of ways to keep your kids busy and engaged, so that they're not just stuck with their face in a screen.
Right. Well, right, because sometimes that can give you a headache or motion sickness, but
it's also not interactive. If you're taking a family trip, hopefully the family is interacting with each other on the trip.
Right. Well, it's a whole lot more fun if you are. And sometimes we took the opportunity when we would take a road trip to pull out the paper map and show them how to read a map. That was another thing. Or they could, figure out how many more miles to the next stop, or just to learn, how to use the map. And some of them would keep little travel journals where they could draw pictures, and just a composition book is really handy because they can color and draw, and they've got that little space to work on, and just to stick things in, receipts or whatever, and ways to make it a little more interactive where they can share with each other or make up a story about something, or
we used
track
to play
of the
those
alphabet.
Games. Yeah, and those old-fashioned games where you say something like, I'm going to go to the grocery store and I'm going to buy carrots. And the next person says, I went to the grocery store and I bought carrots and apples. And you have to remember. And it keeps going around and around.
All of the things, carrots and apples and potatoes, All those things are
Oh.
fun. And I know that there must be websites now. I was always looking for ideas like that out of books. But it's not a bad idea to do a little preparation before you go and have those things ready to pull out. Oh, another thing is like magnetic board games. I had a chess player.
Oh, yes.
Chess or magnetic checkers. And I didn't really love taking that because I had so many pieces and I didn't want to lose them in the car. But somehow we kept up with all of those things. But it's really worth it to plan a little bit, have your little bag or basket. Or I love your idea about them packing their backpack, so that the trip can be pleasant for everybody. If you have any homeschooling questions or comments, we'd love to hear from you.
Email us at happyhomeschoolpod@gmail.com.
Follow us on Twitter @_homeschoolpod.
Find us on Facebook and Instagram at Happy Homeschool Pod.
And be sure to check out the Happy Homeschooler Podcast on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and more. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Melody.
I'm Holly.
Happy homeschooling.
Hi, this is your host, Melody Gillum. Thank you for listening to the Happy Homeschooler Podcast, a Transcript Maker Production. My co-host is Holly Williams Urbach. This episode was produced by Matthew Bass and edited by Norah Williams. Our graphic design is by Pete Soloway, and our music is by the Great Pangolin. You can find her music on YouTube and Twitter at Kylie Wins. That's Kailey Wins. If you'd like to help our podcast grow, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts. Or, as always, tell people about us.
After a long day of teaching math, it's sometimes hard to have the mental bandwidth to write out a high school transcript.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. Can you do that again?